My name is Lydia Holloway. I'm 18 now. And last week I bought the house where my father shattered my fingers with a rusted hammer. I walked right through the front door while he stood on the lawn, jaw slack gripping a cardboard box full of junk he could no longer afford to keep. But I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I smiled. Because this isn't a story about fire. It's about silence. And what happens when silence learns how to speak. You see, in our family, love came with conditions. I just never met any of them. I was 9 when I first realized something was off. Not in a movie meltdown kind of way. It was quieter, meaner. At dinner, my older sister Cassidy, the so-called miracle child, got mashed potatoes sculpted into flower shapes, steak that cut like butter, cornbread muffins with melted honey, and chilled peach slices in a frosted glass bowl. Me, dry white toast, boiled cabbage that stank so badly I could smell it through my bedroom door. I remember one night I worked up the courage to ask why. Maybe they forgot to serve me the real food. Maybe this was some weird accident. My mom didn't even look up from her phone. Because Cassidy needs the energy, she said flatly. You're just you. That line stuck like a splinter under my skin. Too small to remove, but sharp enough to hurt every time I moved. After that, I started noticing more. Cassidy got second helpings. I got warned for being greedy. She broke a lamp and blamed me. Mom believed her without question. I came home with an A in science. No one cared. Cassidy sneezed. There was an emergency pharmacy run. Maybe they didn't hate me. Maybe I just wasn't worth noticing. That thought haunted me until I turned 13. It was a Tuesday, gray and sticky. The rain hadn't started yet, but the air was already damp heavy. I stayed late at the school library, half to study half, because I couldn't stand being home. Our house always felt thick, like the walls were watching. And we didn't have close neighbors. Our house sat 2 lots from the next one, and nobody ever visited. When I walked in that night, I smelled it right away. Garlic rosemary steak. My stomach growled so loud I almost laughed. Cassidy was already at the dining table, perfectly posed, medium rare steak garlic asparagus, golden cornbread muffins stacked high. I walked into the kitchen. My plate was waiting for me. 1 slice of bread, untoasted, a smear of mayonnaise half dried at the edges. That was it. I just stared at it. I wasn't in the mood to pretend anymore. Where's the rest? I asked. My voice was quiet, not rude, just tired. Dad was rinsing dishes. He stiffened at my words. He hated being questioned, especially by me. You asking that with your tone, he said, turning toward me slowly. I blinked. It's not fair. Why does Cassidy get steak and I get this? Cassidy didn't even stop chewing. Maybe because I don't look like a drowned rat. Mom didn't flinch, didn't defend me, didn't even sigh. And Dad? He moved. He grabbed my wrist and slammed my hand down on the kitchen counter. My body jolted from the shock. His other hand reached into the junk drawer, where dead batteries and bent forks lived, and pulled out a hammer. It wasn't clean or sharp, just old, rusted, heavy. He didn't yell, didn't explain. He just brought it down. Crack. I heard the sound before I felt the pain. A moment passed. Then, crack. Again. I think I left my body. I saw my fingers bend the wrong way. I saw purple bloom beneath my skin like a storm. I heard someone scream and realized too late it was me. He leaned in close enough that I could feel his breath. Ask that again, he whispered. I dare you. Then he dropped the hammer like it was a spoon, just clanged to the floor. Cassidy finished her cornbread. No one rushed over. No one called for help. They didn't even look at me. That night they locked me in the basement, said I was hysterical and needed to cool off. They gave me an old ice pack that was mostly water and a dish rag that still smelled like bleach. My fingers pulsed with heat. I wrapped them myself badly and curled into the corner. The door had a bolt on the outside. We didn't have a phone down there. My own flip phone had been confiscated weeks ago after I talked back about missing lunch. There was no way to call for help, no one to hear if I screamed. I shook that whole night, not because I was scared, because I was furious. That was the night something changed. My fingers never healed right. No doctor ever touched them. They don't close fully anymore. They don't hold things steady, but they held on to memory. Cassidy would joke about it sometimes. Tough love, she'd say, makes weak things stronger. But she didn't understand. Pain doesn't just hurt. It rewires you, changes the way you see, the way you move, the way you survive. They thought I'd break or vanish, but I didn't. I stayed, and I listened. I watched. I learned how they walked, how they lied, what made them afraid. And that was their first mistake. Because when you treat someone like they're invisible, you forget they're still in the room, watching and waiting. And I was about to make them remember, all of them. After that night in the basement, nothing was ever really the same again. Not because they treated me differently, but because I stopped waiting for them to. My fingers swelled for days. I couldn't hold a pencil. I faked a sprain at school, told them I slipped on the stairs. My story was weak, but no one asked for more. Maybe the teacher saw it and didn't want to get involved. Maybe they really believed I was just clumsy. Or maybe I'd already become invisible enough that even my pain didn't register. There's a kind of silence that builds like fog. It doesn't hit you all at once. It wraps around you slowly until you're breathing it in and forgetting what clean air ever felt like. Cassidy kept parading around like a pageant queen, filming dance trends in our kitchen while I nursed broken fingers with ice from a plastic bag. My mom kept reorganizing bake sale money in her oversized purse. And my dad? He barely looked at me unless I got too loud, too visible. But I wasn't trying to be visible anymore. I was learning. I learned to walk quietly. I learned to disappear. I learned how to time their routines down to the minute, like how Dad left every Sunday night at exactly 6:30 p.m. Said it was church board meetings, but he never smelled like hymnals when he came home. More like beer motor oil and something bitter I couldn't name yet. I learned that Mom had her own rituals. She worked part-time in the school front office, and I once saw her sneaking out of the building long after hours with a manila folder marked Community Fund. I remember the smirk on her face when she thought no one was watching. She wasn't stealing money, she was stealing opportunity field trips, lunch assistance, extracurricular grant stuff meant for kids who actually needed help. And Cassidy, she was the star of the family, but a flop everywhere else. Her TikTok screamed about family values while she mocked classmates behind their backs, laughed at kids who couldn't afford new shoes, and bragged about being the face of purity for a brand that paid her in gift cards and free skincare. They were all building a fantasy, a facade of a family. And I was the shadow in the corner, unwanted, uninvited, and underestimated. But shadows, they learn how light works. By 16, I was volunteering at the high school theater, anything to stay late to avoid going home. I learned stage lighting, set design, how to run cables, balance soundboards, hide mics under furniture. I learned how to make things heard without ever being seen. And on Saturdays, I worked at a local animal shelter. Cleaning crates, walking dogs, hauling bags of food half my weight. It was loud, messy, and honest. That's where I met her, Donna, 60-something, silver hair cropped short, ran the shelter like a military base, tough love in every step. But her eyes, they were tired in the way only people who've seen too much carry. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it landed like sunlight in winter. One afternoon, I was scrubbing out kennels when I dropped a metal dish. The clang startled me, and my hand trembled trying to pick it up. Donna saw. "What happened to your fingers?" she asked, voice low, not intrusive. "Just there." I opened my mouth, closed it, looked down at my warped knuckles. "Family recipe," I said, half a joke, half a scream. She didn't push, just nodded once like she understood more than I said. 2 weeks later, she handed me a plain white folder, no words, just passed it over like a sandwich. Inside, state documentation, emancipation paperwork, transitional housing options, a list of resources and 3 phone numbers circled in black ink. "You didn't ask," she said, "but I see everything." I didn't cry. I thought I would, but my eyes stayed dry. Instead, I folded the papers neatly, tucked them into the deepest pocket of my backpack and zipped it shut. I wasn't ready yet, but I was close. Because revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's patience, sometimes it's prep. I still lived in that house for 2 more years. Ate toast while Cassidy got chicken Alfredo, cleaned bathrooms while Dad praised her at church potlucks for holding the family together. But I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was planning. I started volunteering at the local public radio station. Donna knew someone there, told the manager, "She's good with wires, quiet, sharp." That's all it took. I spent weekends learning how to fade mics in and out, how to isolate background noise, how to patch recordings through old soundboards. I learned the weight of silence, how it could be shaped, clipped, sharpened, and slowly I began to build my own archive. At home, I started planting recycled mic packs and furniture ones I rigged from the radio station's spare parts. The first one I hid under the old recliner. It ran on a timer, uploaded automatically to an encrypted drive the moment the recording hit 30 minutes. What I caught was everything. Cassidy mocking a disabled classmate in her cheer squad. Mom casually saying, "Just skim from the bake sale again. No one ever checks." Dad laughing drunk, talking about a coworker he scared so bad they pissed themselves. And then came the one that made my blood freeze. Dad's voice slurry but proud. That girl Lydia, she's nothing, barely human. I should have broken her jaw when she talked back. I clipped the file, downloaded a copy, labeled it Final Straw, and I waited. Not for more pain, for the perfect moment. Graduation was coming. Cassidy would get her crown. I'd get a silent seat in the back row. But they had no idea that the girl with the crooked fingers was about to flip the script. And when I did, I wouldn't need to shout. The truth would speak for me. Cassidy's graduation was like watching a perfectly staged musical fake smiles, choreographed hugs, speeches rehearsed to the syllable. She got a brand new car, a necklace from Mom, and a framed prayer quote from Dad that said, "A daughter is God's reward for a good man." I got a ride home in the back seat of the same SUV I'd spent most of my childhood ignored in. No handshake, no congrats, no dinner out, just silence. But I wasn't surprised. I was almost free. That night, I did what I'd been preparing to do for 2 years. I packed everything I truly owned, which wasn't much, into a black backpack I'd bought secondhand. Inside Donna's folder, my encrypted flash drive, a clean hoodie, and a printed copy of my podcast script. Before I left, I taped a note to the fridge. It said, "You broke me, but not forever. Keep the toast. I've got a bigger table now." Signed, Only Lydia. At midnight, I walked out. No goodbye, no last look. Donna met me 2 blocks away in her old pickup truck. She didn't say anything when I got in, just nodded once, turned the key, and drove toward the shelter. My cot was already set up. A job cleaning kennels had been arranged for the next morning. Simple, quiet, and honest. I should have felt scared, but instead I felt light. Lighter than I'd ever been. But I wasn't done. I didn't want revenge to taste like rage. I wanted it to taste like truth. And truth, unlike fire, doesn't destroy, it exposes. That flash drive. It didn't go to the cops. Not yet. Not because they didn't deserve legal trouble, but because the legal system doesn't always listen to girls like me, girls without bruises on paper, girls without credible witnesses, girls who knew how to survive too well to leave visible evidence. So I chose something else. 3 envelopes. The first went to the PTA board. Inside, audio clips of my mom casually discussing field trip money, like her own piggy bank. She even joked about using the cash to buy herself a decent massage for once. She laughed while calling the free lunch kids walking liabilities. Yeah, that landed well. The second went to the school board with a note, courtesy of a student who saw more than you did. Inside, Cassidy's full TikTok archive, unedited raw, pulled straight from her drafts folder. Videos of her mocking other girls' clothes, faking community service footage for views, bragging about putting on a show for brand sponsors. The third envelope was the one I waited to send until last. It went to the church elders, the same ones who called my father a man of principle. It contained 1 audio file, just one, 32 seconds long. Dad's voice slurred, proud, cruel. That girl Lydia, she's nothing, barely human. I should have broken her jaw when she talked back. No context, no embellishment, just truth. While those letters made their way through mail slots and inboxes, I uploaded a single podcast episode to every major platform I could find. Title: The Leftover Daughter. Just my voice, calm, steady. I read the story straight. No names, no town, just what happened in the order it happened. I even scored the background music myself. A soft piano loop layered under the sound of dripping water, recorded in the shelter's mop closet for the echo. I didn't scream. I didn't blame. I told. Because when you're erased for long enough, your truth becomes the loudest sound in the room. I didn't expect much. But by morning it had over 2,000 downloads. By lunch, someone had clipped the line, "When you break a child's fingers, you teach her how to type her own truth." That line went viral on TikTok. People began stitching it, sharing their own childhood trauma, their own survival stories. My voice became a sound trend, not for pity, for power. The fallout came faster than I imagined. Cassidy's brand sponsors dropped her, publicly. One called her behavior deeply misaligned with our values. Mom was asked to step down from the PTA. The board cited ongoing financial discrepancies and unprofessional language towards students. Dad. The church voted to remove him from the board after an emergency elders meeting. One member said, "This doesn't reflect the heart of Christ." He came home that night roaring about how the internet was targeting us, convinced the whole thing was some conspiracy to tear down good people. He blamed trolls, feminists, atheists. Never once did he say my name. That's what made it perfect, because I never used it. The podcast had no last name. The flash drives had no return address. They didn't know it was me, and I didn't need them to. The truth carried its own thunder, but I still had one thing left, one final thread to pull: the house. The one I scrubbed blood from the kitchen floor in. The one where I was locked in a basement with broken fingers. The one where my voice had never been welcome. I didn't want to burn it down. I wanted to walk in legally with keys in my hand and peace in my chest. And then, the listing went live. A 4-bedroom fixer-upper posted by the bank. The family had defaulted. $18,000 behind on payments. Owner looking for immediate offload. My old house? The universe doesn't always hand you clean endings. But sometimes it leaves the door unlocked. I didn't hesitate. I made one phone call to someone who'd been waiting for this moment almost as long as I had. And within 48 hours, I wasn't just the girl they broke. I was the girl who bought the house they tried to bury her in. I made the call to Donna just after I saw the listing. She picked up on the first ring like she'd been expecting it. "It's up," she asked. "No need for pleasantries." "It's up," I said. "They're behind. 18 grand. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You still want it." More than I wanted air. Donna's cousin Marcy worked at a nonprofit that helped transition-aged youth buy their first homes. The kind of program nobody ever talks about, quiet, underfunded, but run by women who'd seen girls like me fall through every crack in the system. They had a matching grant pilot going for qualified applicants. You needed a plan, a steady income, even if small, a referral from a sponsor, proof that you'd been through fire and still knew how to build. I sent them one thing, my podcast episode. 48 hours later, I was pre-approved. A week after that, I stood on the porch of the house where I'd once scrubbed blood off the linoleum while my hand throbbed in unnatural angles. Clipboard in hand, hoodie zipped tight, signing the purchase agreement with fingers that didn't bend quite right but still held the pen. The house wasn't empty yet. Boxes were scattered on the lawn, soggy with dew. Cassidy stood on the porch yelling into her phone, makeup smeared, still trying to find someone who cared enough to help her push back on the scandal. Dad was pacing in the yard, bloodshot eyes darting, muttering into a Bluetooth headset. I overheard him tell someone that this whole thing's a deep fake, and they're targeting us because we're good Christian people. Mom sat in the car with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel like it had betrayed her. None of them noticed me right away, until I stepped forward. Cassidy turned first. She blinked like she was seeing a ghost. What are you doing here?" Dad looked up, jaw hanging slightly, his mouth already forming some excuse or insult or threat. But I didn't give him the chance. I held up the keys, the ones the bank had given me. My name was on the deed now. "I told you," I said, voice calm, "I was going to get a bigger table." And I walked past them, into my house. They didn't follow. Not then, not after that moment. The silence was perfect, heavy, delicious. I didn't yell, didn't slam the door, just closed it behind me, turned the lock, felt the click echo through my chest like a heartbeat finally falling into rhythm. The house was colder than I remembered, emptier, but not dead. I stood in the living room, where the recliner used to sit, the one that held the first mic I'd planted. The old carpet still bore the stain from when I spilled cranberry juice at 8 and got grounded for being ungrateful. I walked through the kitchen, touched the counter, where my hand had once been pinned down. The drawer where the hammer had lived was empty now, but I still opened it out of habit. I let it close slowly. Then I unpacked exactly 3 things. A small recording device, a copy of my X-ray, the one from the free clinic I finally visited a year later, and a wooden nameplate I had custom made for the occasion. It read Lydia Holloway, survivor not servant. I placed them neatly on the new dining table. Real wood, heavy, no scratches, paid for by my own paycheck. That night I didn't blast music. I didn't pop champagne. I didn't even cry. I just sat at that table and watched the moonlight pour in through the window. And I let myself breathe. 3 days later, I hosted my first dinner. Not family. Real people. Donna came. Marcy from the nonprofit came. 2 of the girls from the shelter who had listened to my podcast and cried with me in the stairwell came. Even Carla from the radio station showed up, bringing fresh bread and stories about her worst on-air bloopers. I cooked steak. Cassidy once said I didn't deserve steak, that it was wasted on girls who can't even hold a knife properly. Dad used to eat mine and call it his father's tax. But that night I plated 6 perfect ribeyes. Seared, juicy, medium rare. I made mashed potatoes with real butter. I chilled the peach slices in glass bowls. Every plate was complete. When I passed the last one to Donna, she looked at me with something I hadn't seen in a long time, maybe ever. Pride. She didn't speak right away. Just cut her steak slowly, took a bite, and closed her eyes. Then softly, "What made you come back here?" I thought for a second. Not about vengeance, not about proving them wrong. I looked around at the table, every chair filled by someone who chose me. This place used to be a prison, I said, but I turned the locks around. After dinner, I walked down the hall and stopped in front of the mirror. That mirror, the one where Dad once stared at me and said, "You're useless. Don't even look at me like that." I looked anyway. I traced the scar across the top of my right hand. The skin there still puckered faintly where the bone had healed crooked. My fingers didn't straighten. One knuckle sat too high, but they worked. They held keys. They signed contracts. They typed truth. And they'd built a life no one could take back. But even with all that, there was one more thing I had to do. Because while I no longer needed to destroy them, I could still make sure the last nail went into the coffin. I opened my laptop, plugged in the drive, and began editing the one thing they thought I'd never touch their legacy. I sat at my laptop lit only by the blue glow of the screen and opened the folder I'd labeled Simply Archive. Inside, over 40 audio files. No names, no dates, but each one a truth. I put on my headphones. My fingers, those same crooked fingers, hovered over the timeline in my editing software. I clicked play. Cassidy's voice came first, light and syrupy, bragging on a TikTok draft about helping underprivileged girls at church. But in the next clip, she snapped, "Honestly, those girls smell like desperation. And not the cute kind." I sliced that moment clean, labeled it Cassidy Draft 3, Contrast Cut. Next came Mom, her voice from a conversation I'd caught late one night in the living room. "We'll just skim the bake sale again. No one ever notices. And if they do, we cry." PTA moms hate confrontation. Click, snip, saved as Sharon Bake Sale, soft tone. And finally, the crown jewel, Dad. His voice thicker than bourbon, slurred, but unmistakable. "That girl Lydia, she's nothing, barely human. I should have broken her jaw when she talked back." I paused the playback, not because it hurt, but because I felt nothing. That's when I knew I was ready. I didn't want to ruin them in public for sport. I didn't want to go viral to be famous. I wanted to create a record, a truth that couldn't be unspoken. So I opened up my podcast editor again and began piecing together a second episode, one I never planned to make but now felt inevitable. The title, The Leftover Daughter Epilogue, What Silence Captured. The structure was simple. I narrated each clip with context, never names, never accusations, just story. "I was 15 when I heard this through the wall," I said. "It was the first time I realized Mom laughed when she stole." Click. This was Cassidy at a church fundraiser. Watch how quickly she shifts between saint and snake. Click. And finally, this was the moment I stopped needing an apology. I knew it would never come. Then I let Dad's words play raw and uninterrupted. When it was done, I added one sentence. I didn't break, I recorded. The final file was under 20 minutes, but it felt heavier than anything I'd ever written. Not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't hide. I uploaded it at 11:57 p.m., just before the algorithmic peak window, scheduled posts on 3 platforms, added captions, tagged the audio on TikTok under the original sound from episode 1. When you break a child's fingers, you teach her how to type her own truth. By morning, the new episode was already trending, and that's when things shifted. This wasn't just about my family anymore. Other people started stitching the clips. Teachers, therapists, even a former PTA president from Iowa who'd heard whispers about bake sale fraud in her own district. The hashtag #LeftoverDaughter started picking up steam, being used not just by abuse survivors, but by anyone who'd been made to feel invisible in a place they were told was safe. And then came the emails. One from a former student at Cassidy's school. "She bullied me until I dropped out. I wish I'd recorded her too. Thank you." Another from a mom who recognized my mother's voice. "She stole from our kids' field trip fund 3 years ago. We thought we were crazy." And then an email from a man named Jonathan Alvarez, a junior deacon at Dad's church. He'd heard the clips, played them during a private meeting with the church elders. His message was short. They stripped him of all roles indefinitely. "We apologize for not seeing it sooner. If you ever want a real church family, ours is working to be one." I stared at that line for a long time. If you ever want a real church family, I didn't know how to respond. Maybe I never would. But just seeing it proved something. The truth wasn't just burning bridges, it was lighting torches. But there was one bridge I wasn't sure what to do with yet. Cassidy. She hadn't posted in over a week. Her TikTok page had gone dark. Her sponsorships evaporated like steam. She hadn't followed me, hadn't messaged. Until that afternoon, I heard a knock on the front door. Not a bang, not a scream, just a knock. I peeked through the blinds. She stood there, hoodie pulled low, eyes puffy, holding a large manila envelope. I opened the door slowly. We stared at each other. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she extended the envelope toward me. Pour c'est school. I thought you should have this, she said. I took it. She turned, walked away without another word. I closed the door and sat at the dining table. The envelope was thick, old, labeled in Dad's handwriting, Lydia, do not touch. Inside were things I hadn't seen in years. Photos of me from when I was little, drawings I'd made in preschool, a letter I'd written to Santa at age 7 asking for a family that likes each other, a crayon picture of Cassidy and me holding hands under a crooked sun. And at the bottom, a small broken plastic tiara, the one I wore for a second-grade class play. I'd thought they threw it out. I held it in my hands for a long time. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I didn't owe this pain anything anymore. Still, one thing was clear. My story wasn't over. And Cassidy, she had just taken her first step into the version of truth she couldn't edit. The next morning, I received a DM from an account I didn't recognize. The message was just 4 words. You don't know everything. The message sat on my screen like a trap. You don't know everything. No punctuation, no sender name, just a gray circle and a handle I didn't recognize. For a second, I thought it might be spam, just some troll riding the wave of virality. But something about the timing about Cassidy showing up the day before with that envelope, it didn't feel random. I clicked on the profile. Empty. No posts, no followers. Following one account. Mine. My stomach knotted. There was something in that sentence, you don't know everything, that wasn't a threat. It was a correction. A warning. Or maybe a clue. I typed back 3 words. Then tell me. No reply. The little scene icon didn't even pop up. I set my phone down, but the words kept echoing in my mind like static. Not because I thought I had known everything, but because I'd built my entire identity around uncovering their lies one by one. And if something was still hidden, it meant someone had buried it deep. That evening, I went back to the envelope Cassidy gave me. I spread everything out again on the dining table, the photos, the letter to Santa, the crayon drawings. I looked for something I missed. That's when I noticed it. Taped to the back of the class play photo, barely visible beneath the yellowing edge, was a folded index card. I peeled it off carefully, unfolded it. It was written in my mom's handwriting. 5 words. Ask him about the storage. No signature, no date, no context. But I knew instantly who him was. Dad. The next morning, I drove across town. Not to confront him, at least not directly. I just wanted to see for myself. The storage unit facility sat behind a dusty truck yard on Old Marlin Road, the same road where I'd once followed Dad on foot, watching him meet strange men and load boxes into vans. Back then, I thought it was shady business. Now I was starting to think it was something more personal. I pulled in around 10 a.m., wearing sunglasses and a hoodie, hoping the clerk wouldn't ask too many questions. When I stepped into the small office, the man at the desk barely looked up. I gave him the name Daryl Holloway. He tapped on his keyboard. Yeah, we've got one under that name. Unit 214. Monthly's overdue, just a couple days done and... I nodded slowly, heart thudding. Do you mind if I take a look? I'm his daughter. The man hesitated. Then he shrugged. Far as I care, it's all junk. If you've got a key, go ahead. He handed me a passcode for the gate and pointed me toward the second row on the left. I walked slowly. Each step closer to the unit felt heavier, like the air around me thickened. When I reached Unit 214, the lock was hanging loose. I pulled it open. The metal door groaned, revealing a narrow space stacked with boxes, plastic bins, and a few pieces of covered furniture. A single strip of fluorescent light flickered above. The air smelled like mold and rust. I stepped inside. One box near the front had my name scrawled on the side. L. Holloway, Private. I lifted the lid. Inside were old-school notebooks, a faded teddy bear I hadn't seen since I was 6, and my hospital bracelet, the one from when I was 2 and had pneumonia. Under it was a stack of letters, all addressed to me, all unopened. Some written in childish scrawl, others typed. One even had stickers on the envelope. I blinked. Letters? From who? I opened one. It was from my biological grandmother. The words hit like a punch. We are sorry they won't let us see you. We still light a candle for you every Sunday. The next was from an aunt in Idaho. We sent a gift for your 5th birthday. It came back unopened. Letter after letter, years of them. Postmarked, stamped, returned. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd been kept from me. My hands trembled as I picked up the last envelope. It was addressed from someone named Rachel Dawson. The name didn't ring a bell until I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. A woman holding a baby. Me. And beneath it, in looping handwriting, If you ever find this, I hope you know the truth about how much I loved you, even when I wasn't allowed to raise you. I stood frozen. My mother, the woman who raised me, wasn't my birth mother. No, this wasn't possible. Except it was. And it explained everything. The distance, the resentment, the subtle disgust, the way she'd called me just you, the favoritism toward Cassidy, the way I was always the other. Because I was. I wasn't hers. Not entirely. The truth unraveled in seconds, like a dropped roll of film, years of missing context suddenly sliding into place. The basement, the toast, the hammer, all of it made a twisted, brutal kind of sense. And suddenly the phrase hit me again like a whisper through steel. You don't know everything. I clutched the envelope and stumbled out of the unit, barely remembering to close the door behind me. I drove home with a lump in my throat that refused to move. By the time I walked through my front door, the sky had turned the color of bruises, deep blue and purple, like my fingers once were. I laid everything out on the kitchen table, the letters, the bracelet, the photo, and then I sat. I didn't cry. I just sat, because there's a moment when truth stops feeling like power and starts feeling like grief. But even through the shock, one thought broke through the fog. Someone had buried this truth, and I was going to find out exactly who and why. Because if they lied about where I came from, what else had they hidden from me? The house was silent as I sat at the dining table. The photo of the woman Rachel Dawson still in my hand. Her eyes looked like mine. Not exactly, but close enough to make my skin prickle. The way she cradled the baby, the softness in her expression, it didn't match anything I'd ever seen from the woman I called Mom. No, not Mom. Sharon. Suddenly even her name felt foreign, cold. I laid the photo down beside the stack of letters and stared at the name Rachel like it might open a door I hadn't known existed. And then I did what scared me most. I searched her online. I typed Rachel Dawson Tacoma WA into every platform I could think of. Social media, public records, obituaries. There were hits. One old address in a neighborhood I used to ride past on the school bus. One arrest from 15 years ago, trespassing on private property. One church newsletter from 2009 that said, "Please pray for Rachel D., currently battling addiction and working toward reunification." And then a Facebook profile, locked down tight. But the profile photo was unmistakable. It was her. The same eyes, softer, older, alive. I hesitated. I didn't know what I wanted. A conversation, closure, proof. But my hands moved before my mind caught up. Message sent, "I think you might be my mother. I found the photo. I just want to know the truth." I hit send, no turning back. The reply came less than 10 minutes later. Rachel Dawson, Lydia. Oh my God. I've waited so long for this. My throat closed. She offered to meet. Said she'd respect my pace, my space, anything I needed. We picked a coffee shop downtown. Public, neutral. I brought Donna with me, just in case. She waited outside, sipping black coffee and pretending to scroll her phone. I knew she'd be watching through the glass the whole time. Rachel walked in wearing a second-hand coat and eyes that had clearly cried just before arriving. When she saw me, her hand went to her mouth. "It's really you." I sat. "You're alive." She nodded slowly. Barely, but yes. I had a million questions. None of them formed right away. She started. "I was 19 when I had you. Your dad, your biological father, left before I gave birth. I was in no place to raise you, Lydia. I was homeless. Addicted. But when I got clean 2 years later, I tried to find you." I stared at her. "So, how did I end up with Sharon and Daryl?" She swallowed. "They were distant relatives of your dad. When the state looked for emergency placement, they volunteered, said they wanted to help, said they'd allow contact." She looked away, her voice cracked. "But they never did. Every birthday letter I sent came back. Eventually, the social worker stopped returning my calls. I tried to speak. I couldn't." Rachel looked back at me. "I never stopped. I stayed sober. I built a small life. I watched you grow up from a distance when I could school photos, TikToks, podcast clips. And when I heard your voice in that episode," she covered her mouth again, crying softly. "I knew it was you, and I was too ashamed to reach out. My heart was pounding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to leave. I wanted answers I knew I'd never fully get. But I also wanted peace." "I'm not mad," I said finally. "Not at you." We sat in silence for a long time. I didn't invite her back into my life, but I didn't shut the door either. Donna waited until she left to sit beside me. "She looked like you," Donna said gently. I nodded. "I didn't think I needed this," I whispered, "but maybe I did." We drove back home in silence. That night I took everything, the letters, the photo, the tiara, and placed them in a wooden box I labeled Origin. I didn't want to forget this version of the truth. I wanted to honor it. The next morning, I recorded a third and final episode. The Leftover Daughter Final Note. I told the story not as a tragedy, but as a bridge. A lot of people think revenge ends with destruction, I said, but mine didn't. It ended with clarity, with truth. I didn't name Rachel. I didn't name Sharon or Daryl either. I talked about identity, about silence, about what it means to build your own table when the ones you grew up around always had a seat missing. I ended it with this. If you're listening to this and wondering whether you're the leftover, maybe you are, but maybe that just means you're the one who gets to rebuild from scratch. And when you do, you won't need their permission. You'll bring your own knife, your own chair, and maybe if you're lucky, your own recipe for joy. By sunset, the final episode hit 100,000 plays. A week later, a publisher reached out. They wanted to talk about a book. I said maybe, but before I could even think about writing something permanent, I did one more thing. I flipped the old family photo frame that had sat in the hallway for years, Sharon, Daryl, Cassidy, and me, with a forced smile. I flipped it face down. Then I walked outside. The sky was soft, warm with early summer haze. Birds chirped. The wind moved gently across the porch. Cassidy was standing by the curb. She held no phone, no envelope, just herself. She looked smaller now, not physically, just less inflated. I listened, she said. To the podcast, I asked. She nodded, all three. We stood there in silence. Then she said something I never expected. I didn't know what they did to you. I didn't want to know. I was scared if I saw it, it would mean I was part of it. You were, I said honestly. Not cruel, just true. She nodded again. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. But it was something. I'm not ready, I said. I know, she replied, and she walked away. This time I didn't follow her, because I had somewhere better to be. Inside, with the new table, set for 8. Steak in the pan, music in the background, and joy simmering not for show, not for content, not for revenge, but because I earned it. And that was the last part they never expected, because the girl they thought would break quietly, just learned how to live loudly. Story 2. Grace is my name. I recently received my degree in business communications from a tiny Pennsylvania college, and I am 24 years old. 3 years ago, I would have laughed out if you had asked me if I would eventually return to my parents' old beige house in the Pittsburgh suburbs after college. However, life has a humorous way of reminding you that things don't always go as planned. On a somber April afternoon, I clutched the handle of my battered bag and headed back to my family's comfortable beige home. But I kept telling myself that this was only going to last for 3 months, maybe 4 at most, and that I would save up enough money for a down payment on a modest apartment close to the city center. I'd already seen it in my imagination. A warm kitchen, large windows that let in plenty of natural light, and peaceful nights spent with just me and a nice cup of tea. Fortunately, the job search didn't take as long as I had anticipated. Madison & Cole, a rapidly expanding marketing agency in downtown Pittsburgh, made me an offer within 2 weeks. Although the initial pay wasn't very substantial, it was sufficient to provide me a sense of security. The quarterly performance bonuses also seemed like a good idea. I may achieve my objective of financial freedom even more quickly if I performed well. I sat with my folks at the dining table that evening. Excitement fills my heart. Dad was looking through an old newspaper as Mom was preparing tomato meatballs. I was unable to contain myself any longer, so I joyfully declared that I had been hired by Madison & Cole. The clinking of knives and forks ceased instantly, before I even noticed the difference in the air, and there are quarterly incentives in addition to a good pay. Mom set her fork down. Her eyes were serious. Will you be moving out soon? Her tone was calm yet icy as she inquired. My smile vanished from my lips as I froze. Yes, most likely in 3 or 4 months. Prior to renting my own house, I would like to save a bit more money. An all too familiar gaze that seldom indicated anything positive was exchanged between my parents. Dad began the same old lecture after clearing his throat. Grace, you are aware that due to her back condition and mine, your mother is only able to work part-time at the library. He paused. At the plant, there are whispers of layoffs, Mom said, sounding as though she were delivering a heartbreaking story. Your assistance with family expenditures is much needed. It would be easier for your work if you stayed here for free. Don't you think that just makes more sense? I felt a weight in my chest as I gazed down at the cooling meatballs on my plate. Another part of me, the one that yearned for independence, roared in protest, even if they weren't incorrect. Finally, I faked a grin and nodded. I suppose I can remain a bit longer. Suddenly, my new existence had begun. I enjoyed supper with my parents, got up early for work, and helped out with the utility bills at night. It appeared to be all right at first. I kept telling myself that I was doing the right thing by supporting my family for the time being and that I would soon have a place of my own. I kept telling myself it was only a passing phase. 3 months would pass quickly, but by the time the 4th month arrived, I began to realize that something was seriously off. Mom was waiting for me in the living room one Friday night when I arrived home from a long, demanding day of working on a new client campaign. On the table before her, a sizable envelope appeared as though it had been there all day. When she talked, I hadn't even removed my shoes. Although she spoke softly, her voice was colder as the winter wind outside. With your present pay, Grace, your father and I performed some calculations. You are able to make a larger contribution to household costs. I blinked as a shiver went through my body. What are you saying? Dad's remarks trailed off as he left the kitchen with a water bill. Electricity, water, online, everything is rising. We cannot continue to cover it alone. The offer of no rent had initially been simply nice talk, so I tightened my hold on my bag's strap. They had everything set up to encourage me to pay extra, now that I was settling into my work. I already make weekly grocery purchases. I added attempting to maintain my composure, and I have also been paying my electricity bills since last month. Mom gave me a sad little grin and shook her head. Grace, that's only a little portion. We truly need you to give a certain amount each month at this time. Consider it a form of family duty sharing. With a sinking heart, I gripped my bag tighter. Every time I felt like I was moving forward, I felt like I was being yanked back by another unseen chain. I was only going to be here for a couple of months. With a cracked voice, I reminded them, to move out, I'm saving money. Dad's face hardened as he crossed his arms. While saving money is a wonderful thing, family is family. When we need you, you can't abandon us. The line, family is family, kept repeating in my mind like a depressing, never-ending tune. Too exhausted to protest, I gave a soft yes and rushed upstairs, swallowing the knot in my throat. In the days that followed, everything seemed to be under a thin coating of pressure. Light talk was no longer part of dinner. It was a constant barrage of subliminal warnings about new costs, roof repairs, and growing gas bills. Mom would remark as she held the heating bill, "This winter is really harsh. It would be so much simpler if someone could provide a bit more." Silently, with a growing sense of bitterness, I ate my cold soup. I was working on Madison and Cole's quarterly report at my desk one Saturday afternoon when Mom came in the door with a stack of family health insurance documents. Her comments were piercing, yet she had a charming grin. "Grace, we thought you might be able to assist with a tiny portion of the insurance premiums. Health is everything, you know." I gazed up at her as if she were a stranger. "I don't even currently have my own insurance, Mom. You're healthy and youthful. You'll be all right." As if it were entirely normal for me to be carrying the whole family that night, while resting in my old room and listening to the howling wind outside, she interrupted me with a breezy voice. When precisely had I become the walking pocketbook of the family, I wondered. My initial strategy to save for 3 months and move out right immediately was as flimsy as smoke and was quickly derailed by guilt trips, sharp remarks, and suggestive looks cloaked in worry. I understood that I would never be permitted to leave this house if I remained there. I shut my eyes. My chest was heavy with the weight of an unformed choice, but a small flame glowed deep inside. I knew I couldn't continue to be this way indefinitely. I hadn't even planned my next course of action yet. When the front door opened one Sunday afternoon, a chilly October wind blew in. My sister, Lauren, who was 8 years my senior, was married to Craig and had 2 little children, Mason, who was 3, and Ella, who was 5. Despite living 2 states away, she unexpectedly arrived today with her entire family. The hall echoed with laughter. Grace reclined back in the music while Ian went for the gases. Craig, Travis, and I. In fact, this is. In Mason, I'm being crowded out by all of the males. It's been a long time. She hurried over, giving the children hugs and gushing over them as if they were the cutest creatures in the world. I silently watched from the kitchen doorway while holding a glass of water. A part of me was already accustomed to this, the way Dad left his favorite sports show to meet Craig at the door, the way Mom brightened up when she saw Lauren, the way everything in the home felt so alive, only when Lauren was present. "Could you get Craig another glass, Grace?" Without even looking at me, Mom replied in a lovely voice. Silently, I put down my glass of water and got another, like a shadow sweeping over the space. I discovered something new that evening. The fact that I had grown up, graduated with honors, and was responsible for a significant portion of the family costs didn't matter. My parents would always see me as Lauren's supporting cast member. She was the subject of every talk during supper. Mom was always inquiring about the new home. Craig and Lauren had recently purchased the opulent Christmas trip they had planned, or the fancy school they were thinking of enrolling Ella in. Is Ella yet to learn to read? With pride gleaming in her eyes, my mother inquired. Mom, she's reading children's books already. Lauren smiled. Mason is also learning to swim. He's doing great. That's fantastic. With a proud expression on her face, Mom turned to face my dad and shouted, Our daughter is very exceptional. I was not questioned about my work at Madison and Cole. Nobody cared that I was attempting, nor did they inquire about the campaigns I had won or the late hours I spent trying to make deadlines. That I was creating my own life. After supper, as I was doing the dishes, I broke up my meatball into little pieces and chewed quietly, hardly tasting anything. Behind me, Lauren emerged nonchalantly, drinking a glass of white wine while resting on the kitchen counter. Are you still residing here? She laughed as though it were the strangest thing ever. Yes, I said quickly as I scrubbed a dish in the hot water. She's suggesting that it's a little strange to live with your parents at this age. I turned and met her eyes, which were the same shade of light blue as Mom's. I tried to seem cool as I added, I'm here to help them pay the bills. Lauren took another sip and shrugged. It has to be done by someone. They're lucky to have you. Despite her kind smile, every word was painful. That night, I picked at my chest. I'm sitting in my room as Craig and Lauren joke in the living room. I was no longer even depressed, simply a chilly numbness. I was never picked first. In this house, I had never even been an option. I was only the stand-in, the underpaid assistant, and the backup. When Lauren's spotlight became a bit dimmer, clearer than ever, the concept inched its way into my head. No one would save me if I didn't. It was all over in an instant. Lauren and Craig moved in with my parents for a short time just 2 weeks ago, saying their new home was being renovated. After a hard day at work, I can still clearly recall that afternoon when I dragged myself up the porch stairs only to find their SUV parked outside and hear the kids' loud shrieks coming from the yard. Mom, I had never seen her face light up that brightly, met me at the entrance. Grace, I'm glad you're back home. Mason and Ella are vivacious. I can't keep up with you and your dad. Mason slammed into my legs before I had even removed my coat. Lauren circles the couch while holding a marker in her chocolate-stained hands. From the kitchen, Lauren stuck her head out. Her blonde hair was tied back. She had a cheerful, carefree face. My dear, the timing was ideal. We were considering going out to eat dinner. You don't mind spending a few hours watching the children, do you? I started to object, but my mother spoke first. Her voice was as sweet as honey. I'm not as sprite as your father, and I used to be, you know. You're the only one who can keep up with them, Grace. I surveyed the unkempt house. There are toys all over the place. I swallowed the lump in my throat and noticed fresh stains on the carpet. Just a couple of hours, I mumbled, trying to convince myself. However, a few hours was never just that. After dinner, there were drinks with friends, coffee, and a late-night movie. I stayed up until almost midnight that night, urging Mason to fall asleep as she sobbed for her mother. I attempted to sit down with my parents the following day to express how overwhelmed I was, but all I received were contemptuous glances. All night long, my back was hurting. Dad rubbed his hip and moaned. I am no longer able to chase after the little ones. Emotionally, mainly for herself, she sighed. I also suffered from a headache all morning. Grace, they can only be handled by someone as young and powerful as you. Thus an implicit agreement was reached. The default babysitter was Grace. I worked from 8 to 5, came home exhausted, and immediately became the unpaid nanny. On weekends when my buddies went on excursions, attended festivals, or just slept in, I juggled Mason's meals, Ella's coloring sessions, tidying up the house before my parents' impromptu gatherings. Once I dared to ask for a weekend off, only to be met with a surprised stare as if I had just done a severe sin. You can't just think about yourself, Grace. Mom murmured, her voice laden with remorse. Lauren and Craig need some time together. The kids are little. Who else will care for them if not you? I kept silent in this house. Every debate focused on one issue. Everyone else's needs. Mine just didn't exist. Worse, Lauren began to accept my presence as a given. Every time I stepped through the door after work, she was there waving a list of duties. Feed Mason. Help Ella with preschool tasks. Laundry should be folded. Toys should be cleaned. Lauren once stated, we're going on a date night. As I bounced a sobbing Mason on my hip, I applied lipstick in front of the living room mirror. You'll get it eventually. For you, this is a positive real-world experience. I gritted my teeth, feeling as though I were being bound to someone else's life. I could feel myself losing small parts of myself every day, and a voice continued to get louder in the background. Grace, it's time to change. Nobody will get up if you don't. As I entered the room on a chilly Tuesday night, I received the news. Lauren sat tensely at the kitchen table, holding her phone tightly. With his hands raking through his disheveled brown hair, Craig was pacing the living room. Mom showed up before I could inquire what was going on. She sounded as though she had just been struck. Get ready. We must speak. I felt sick to my stomach as I untied my scarf. Mom spoke hastily, wringing her hands. I just got notice. His business failed. Lauren's family's primary source of income was lost. I turned to face Lauren. She sat with one hand over her face, her shoulders trembling a little, and her head down. Even though I knew she was my sister, I was still feeling uneasy. Dream, what is the current plan? Trying to speak steadily, I asked, with a look of desperation in her eyes. Mom looked at Dad and then back at me, suggesting that they should temporarily move in here until they were able to get back on their feet. With 4 extra people and the constant pandemonium of 2 tiny children, our 4-bedroom house already seemed claustrophobic, so I froze. How about my room? With a constricted throat, I asked. Mom took a while to respond. We've spoken about it, Dad added, clearing his throat. Mason and Ella require a secure environment in which to play. We believe you ought to vacate your room. And me, I swallowed hard. As if saying it quickly would make it sound less crazy, Mom added, you can move into the storage room. Grace, only for a short bit. You're still young, you will adapt. I tasted blood as I bit my lips so hard. The storage space. There was hardly enough room for a desk and a twin bed. The spot where old Christmas ornaments and stacks of newspapers that Dad couldn't discard had always been stacked high. I felt like screaming. I wanted to know why my needs were prioritized over everyone else's. Instead, feeling as though my life had been stolen once more, I simply nodded rigidly and went upstairs. Every time I took another box out of the storage room that weekend, I cleaned it up. I became numb in one place. For years, my bedroom served as my haven. It was carpeted, repainted in gentle colors, and stocked with toys. On the day Lauren and Craig arrived home, the house became a frenzied swarm. Mason and Ella let loose and yelled through the corridors. While Craig struggled in the dining room with Mason's crib, Lauren ruled her court like a queen, directing the furnishings. Mom was infatuated with the children and couldn't stop. Dad made Craig coffee as if he were a distinguished visitor. And me, I disappeared into my new room, rebuilding my frail twin bed while fighting back sighs. After everything had subsided that evening, I went to the kitchen to get something to eat. The noises of a cartoon Ella was watching filled the living room, and a platter of cold cookies was resting on the table. Mom remarked, Grace, could you watch Ella and Mason tomorrow? As soon as she saw me. Craig and Lauren need to finish off some paperwork. I went cold. I'm employed. In a hoarse voice, I reminded her. Only at night. She mentioned that platters were already being cleared. Only a few of ours. You're still young. You're capable of managing it. I can hardly recall how I got back to my small room that evening. All I know is that while I laid there, I heard Mom gently telling Lauren that everything will be well, Ella laughing, and loud phone calls. All I had left was this small room and a sense of loneliness that seemed to permeate every breath. The fact that Lauren and Craig's move-in was the start of a true nightmare quickly became apparent. Mason's yelling at 6 in the morning now marked the beginning of my days. Ella knocked on my door whenever she could. Before work even gave me 5 minutes of solitude, the home was rumbling with footfall toys clattering and cartoons blasting in my little room. I hadn't even opened my eyes yet. Mason would frequently infiltrate and cover my papers with cookie crumbs or crayon smears. I once scraped crayon stains off a client contract due for the whole night. Craig and Lauren lived like they were on vacation the following morning. The majority of Lauren's time was spent conversing with friends or browsing social media. Craig sat at the kitchen table and seemed to be looking for a job, but he was really just playing games. Parents. It was turmoil that exhilarated them. Mom would laugh every time I brought up the mess or the loudness. They are only children. Give them freedom. Dad wouldn't. The chaos and commotion were evidence of a contented family. I dragged myself home from work just to be caught up in the same never-ending loop. Watching children, preparing food, cleaning. Dinner turned into a mad dash. chopping Mason's meal and cleaning up Ella's liquid. I was forcing myself to eat my own cold leftovers. Even worse, the costs began to soar. I had to read the new power bill 3 times before I could see it clearly. Due to my parents' meager pensions and Lauren and Craig's unstable financial situation, it was almost double what it had been, and it all landed on me. Despite my best efforts to remain composed, my hands trembled as I brought it up at dinner one Thursday night. I placed the power bill on the table and said, "We need to talk about the bills. I can't continue to cover everything on my own." Lauren frowned as she raised her head from her phone. "It's incredibly rude of you to bring up money at this time, Grace." Mom spoke up right away, her tone full of criticism. "Craig and Lauren are having a hard time, you know. Family members are meant to help one another. It's not nickel and dime, everything." I tightened my chest and balled my fists beneath the table. "And who's on my side?" My voice trembled as I asked. "I also have a full-time job. I have to put money down for my own future." Craig mumbled and snorted. "The future is saving for later that year, really necessary for a single girl." It was like being slapped across the face. My chair squealed on the floor as I got to my feet. I took the money in my hands and remarked icily, "I understand. I'll do my share, the remainder. Try it yourself." I pivoted and made my way back to the storage area. Behind me, like 1,000 small blades, came the sound of laughing and whispered remarks. I had trouble sleeping that night. I listened to footsteps racing down the hallway while I lay awake on the little bed. My mother whispering about how Lauren manages family pressure so well while the late-night TV blares below. One idea burned brightly in my thoughts amid the shadows. I couldn't continue to live this way. If I continued to remain, for the first time in months, I would lose what remained of myself. I opened my laptop, sat up, and began looking for flats. I was leaving, even though I wasn't sure where I was heading yet. And I wasn't turning around this time. I had just finished brewing my coffee on Saturday morning when Mom came into the kitchen with a large bundle of money. With a loud thud as though she wanted everyone to hear, she dropped it on the table. "Grace, we must discuss the bills for groceries, water, power, and the internet." With a solemn look, she started. I put down my coffee. My heart is lowering. I knew this was going to be a bad conversation. "Everything has become more costly," Mom said, her tone hinting at resentment. "The population of this place has increased. Costs are greater, of course." I tried to remain composed as I nodded. "For that reason, I proposed." Slowly, I stated that everyone should properly split the cost of life. I have a piece and each family has a piece. Everyone will find it simpler in this way. Suddenly, there was stillness in the kitchen. Lauren descended the steps. Her face appeared as fresh as if nothing had happened, and her hair was immaculate. She laughed dryly when she overheard the talk, sending shivers down my spine. Grace, Lauren stated in a sarcastic yet honey-sweet voice. "Will you truly take advantage of your own family?" Craig yelled from the living room, delivering yet another insult that infuriated me. "You still have the guts to bring this up while we're having a hard time." He shook his head inwardly, as if I were the most unappreciative kid in America. "Family is about grace and sacrifice. It's not always possible to focus on money." With a voice as hard as a gavel, Mom struck the last blow. "If you refuse to assist while the family is having difficulties, which type of family member do you belong to?" I swallowed all the arguments that were lodged in my throat and bit my lip hard. Any explanation I offered would simply be dismissed as being unappreciative. They wanted to give me a smack. I felt a firm grip on my heart as I turned away. Like the coldness that was creeping up on me, the coffee in my hand had gone cold. My animosity was no longer a simmering ache after that day. It developed into a storm that grew stronger every day. I continued to serve as Lauren and Craig's free weekend babysitter. Lauren would contact me every Friday afternoon with something like, "Craig and I have plans. You will see Ellen Mason writing tomorrow evening. Regards, my love." Like it was inevitable. It's not worth asking. My parents continued to make excuses for their health whenever I suggested that they might be able to assist. Dad is experiencing headaches. Ari's mother is experiencing back pain. Grace were becoming old. Time and again, the same broken record. I was caught in a never-ending circle in the meanwhile. Work, clean, babysit, and pay bills. I once had the audacity to refuse basic SMS messages. It's a hectic weekend for me, not able to watch children. My phone exploded with missed calls and guilt-trip texts from Lauren, my dad, and my mother in a matter of minutes, all of which had the same accusatory tone. "The family is being let down by you. Your sister has endured a great deal. Only self-centered individuals abandon their families at difficult times. At this point, every phrase seemed like a stab to my dignity. I didn't feel bad. I simply felt empty. While I was cleaning up the toys that were all over the living room on Sunday night, Lauren came in carrying a smoothie. "Tomorrow morning, Craig and I are going to look at model homes," she replied nonchalantly. "You will thus have to supervise the children once more." I felt like ice as I froze and stared at her. "You are aware that I also have a life, even though I spoke with such a severe tone." Lauren grinned icily and shrugged. "Oh, Grace, you work a desk job and live with your folks. What on earth is keeping you so busy?" I straightened up and looked her in the eyes. I wasn't afraid for the first time in months, without hesitation. "Just wait," I whispered. "Soon enough, you'll know." Lauren's irritated, perplexed countenance was gone as I turned and left. A plan was developing inside of me, and this time, I vowed that no one would ever again shatter my aspirations. In the little storage area, I sat huddled up. Uneven shadows are being produced on the walls by the low light from an ancient desk lamp. I was holding a text message from my college closest friend, Rachel. This weekend, Grace was organizing a ski vacation to Blue Ridge Mountain. "Join us." "Do you need a vacation from that crazy home torn?" I gazed at the television. I had the need to say no. As usual, I was afraid too busy or had family responsibilities. This time, however, I felt a strong need. I needed to go. I needed to take a breath. I had to remind myself that there was more to life than this never-ending cycle of paying bills, taking care of the kids, and cleaning. I returned the type. "I'm on board. Please reserve a space for me." Then I heard someone knock on the door. Lauren took a quick look inside. Her flawless golden locks were wrapped up nicely. She smiled as if she had never experienced adversity. "Bravo," she sang. "This Saturday, Craig and I received an invitation to Uncle Gene's birthday celebration, downtown. Dad and Mom are also coming. You're going to watch Ellen Mason." My voice sounded quieter than I had anticipated. "I'm sorry, but this weekend I won't be home." Lauren scowled, unable to comprehend. As if I were going snowboarding with my pals. I spoke it again, focusing on each word. The room's air felt as though it had frozen. "You're joking," Lauren laughed sharply. "This is a family matter, Grace." "I'm not joking, though," I murmured as I got to my feet, experiencing a surge of fresh power. "I am entitled to my own life. I'm no longer your free babysitter," shouting reverberated below within minutes. Pride Month. However, they are all contributing to a disorganized chorus of indignation. "You're leaving your family behind to go skiing." Grace's mom let out a cry. "Your lack of responsibility is astounding," Dad snarled. "You violated the confidence we had in you," Craig added, as though he was the most qualified person to talk to her. "Squeezed." Lauren's voice was quivering with rage as she pointed a finger directly at me. "Don't ever return if you leave this house this weekend." Her words were like a hammer to my chest, but instead of falling apart as they would have, I just grinned. I hadn't smiled so freely in months. I replied icily, "Don't worry. I have no plans to return, therefore I'm going." As though they were still in shock over what they had just heard, they stood still. However, I didn't give them time to respond. I went upstairs, turned around, and began packing. Just a few of outfits, my laptop, and private documents. I was prepared to abandon the others without hesitation. Behind me, I could hear my father yelling, my mother sobbing from below, and Lauren's irate voice whirling like a whirlwind. However, I didn't turn around, not once. I was driving my old automobile right out of the street a few hours later. I had moved on from the oppressive walls and the people who could only make demands and never comprehend. I slept on Rachel's little couch that night in a warm, laughing-filled apartment. In a long time, for the first time, I was able to breathe air free of expectations and bitterness. I awoke the next morning on Rachel's couch. I imagined a peculiar sensation of comfort, a feeling I had forgotten for months as weak winter sunshine filtered through the drapes. I was given a steaming cup of coffee by Rachel. "Grace, are you certain?" With pride and concern in her eyes, she inquired. I grinned. "I'm confident it's more certain than ever." I returned to the old house that same day, not to make amends or engage in negotiations, but to put a stop to everything. Everyone in the family appeared to be waiting. Mom sat with an icy expression on her face in the living room. Dad was clearly disappointed and had his arms crossed. As the children played with toys on the floor, blissfully oblivious to the impending storm, Lauren stood behind Craig, her lips pushed together. I inhaled deeply before moving to the middle of the space. Calmly, I responded, I'm come to get the remainder of my belongings. I also want to inform you that I will no longer be residing here as of today. I also don't have any additional living bills to pay. As though the room had been deprived of oxygen, the air became dense. Mom sprang to her feet. She had a gleeful, pale face. You can't do this, Grace. Families don't desert one another. I fixed my unwavering gaze on her eyes. No, Mother. This is not how real families take advantage of one another. Dad's voice boomed as he smashed his fist on the armrest. You are just considering yourself. I swallowed, feeling a surge of rage, and responded with an odd composure. For years I've been considering everyone else. It's time to consider myself now. Lauren crossed her arms and scoffed. Hold off until you require assistance. You shouldn't count on any of us to support you. With a grin devoid of resentment, I turned to face her. A family that only understands how to make demands and never once inquires about my well-being is not what I need. As I silently made my way upstairs and collected my last possessions, nobody said. My laptop, my favorite coat, a few beloved novels, and a tiny luggage. That was it. Everything else. The ill-considered presents. I didn't regret leaving behind those painful memories. Mom came running up to me and grabbed my arm as I pulled my bag down the stairs, her eyes desperate. Please consider it, Grace. This is something you'll regret. I muttered, No, Mom. I'd regret staying. As I carefully released my arm from her hold, I pulled the door open. Every nerve in my body awoke as the icy January air struck my face. Like the last period on a long, agonizing chapter, I let the ancient wooden door close behind me as I stepped outside after pulling my bag across the threshold. My phone was constantly buzzing with calls and texts as I drove back to Rachel's little apartment. I knew what they stated without even having to read them. Rachel greeted me with a big grin and a firm embrace. She said, "Welcome back to the world where people love themselves." That evening, drinking hot chocolate while nestled on a soft blanket on the little terrace. For the first time in years, I felt really alive. No more stifling pressure, no more charges. Just quiet, 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 like a windless winter night. I signed the lease for my first apartment 3 days later, a little light-filled space about 15 minutes from the office. It wasn't flawless. The flooring were ancient, the walls had some cracks, and the heater hummed softly. However, it seemed like a whole kingdom of freedom to me. After hanging the landscape photo on the wall, arranging my books on a shelf, and laying fresh sheets on the bed, I stood in the middle of the room, overcome with an inexplicable sense of happiness. I was going to start over here. I once believed that my first few days in my new flat would never come true. I got myself a nice cup of coffee, sat in the window-facing recliner, and savored the complete tranquility every morning as sunshine streamed into my room. No loud TV, no weeping children, no one yelling my name and making constant requests. Just me, all of my privacy and total peace. My bank account started to shift such that it could no longer pay for a household's internet, water, and energy bills. Now I had enough money coming in from my job to cover my personal needs, rent, and even savings. I was able to afford small pleasures for the first time in years. Dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant, and a new book. A beach vacation for the weekend. I joined a local yoga class, met new friends, and gradually created a life free from excessive demands and expectations, a life I never imagined I could have. Naturally, though, my family wasn't amenable to the change. I was just getting set to watch my favorite movie on a Sunday night when I received the first message. Mom sent Grace a text. "I need a conversation with your father. This division of the family cannot continue." Then, "Lauren, are you aware that the children are always inquiring about you? Do you not feel bad about it?" Prague followed shortly after. "The folks who reared you deserve gratitude at the absolute least." Like a swelling wave, the texts were pouring in. The calls began when I didn't answer. Lauren, then Dad, then Mom. Everyone is taking turns. I gripped my phone and watched it repeatedly flash on and off, no longer experiencing guilt. Instead, I felt a calmness that was continuous and frigid. This manipulation of emotions was too familiar to me. Threatening but sweet phrases, accusations combined with fake tears. It inhaled deeply. I then blocked each number individually. Parents, Craig and Lauren. After that, I accessed my social media accounts and disconnected from everyone who would serve as a conduit for their grievances and guilt trips to return to me. It wasn't simple. I fell into the chair feeling as though I had just removed a bulky suit of armor that had held me in place for years. My fingers shook a little as I clicked the block button. I woke up the following morning feeling oddly relieved. There was silence on the phone. No more guilt-tripping calls or demanding texts. I sipped my coffee while seeing the street's naked trees from the window. A little smile appeared on my lips. I didn't regret the decision I had made for myself. On my way home from work that afternoon, I made a stop at a tiny bookshop. I purchased a gorgeous fountain pen, a new notepad, and a nice blue leather cover. I sat down at my workstation that evening, opened the first page, and started writing. This is where my new chapter starts. I was aware that there might be lonely times. On certain evenings, doubt or yearning would creep in. However, I was also aware that I would tackle any situation head-on. Day by day, my new existence became steadier, and I started to learn how to listen to my own voice rather than other people's. Sunlight poured through the window every morning. Hope flooded my heart. Learned to appreciate the little things in life. A tea with a hint of fragrance. On a quiet afternoon, a beloved music is playing while cooking. Take a stroll at the park next to my place. Once these pleasures had been obscured by yells, scowls, and incessant demands, I gradually came to understand that I could live the life I want without permission. I no longer had to make sacrifices for individuals who had never really appreciated me in order to establish my value. I reflected on the years I had pushed myself, put in extra hours to pay the bills, sacrificed valuable weekends to watch kids, and carried about responsible parties that I had never been comfortable with in the first place. I always thought that if I worked hard enough and loved deeply enough, people would ultimately notice me. However, the reality was that my generosity merely gave them a sense of entitlement. I composed a statement late one night as I was making notes in my new notebook. One word at a time. I make a self-promise that I deserve to be respected, loved, and allowed to make my own decisions in life. I came to understand that love is not a mindless sacrifice. It's not sacrificing yourself for crumbs of love. Uplifting, sharing, and respecting one another are all aspects of true love, items that I never got in my previous house. I began establishing limits after that. I gained the ability to refuse irrational requests without feeling bad for prioritizing myself. I took soft skills lessons, worked on my job, and even enrolled in a weekend cooking class, something I had never dared to do previously because I was always giving my time away to other people. Weekends were transformed into priceless times of genuine pleasure rather than being spent stumbling from fatigue. Brief road excursions, coffee dates with pals, cozy nights, reading under a lamp's pleasant light. I got back in touch with old pals, the ones I had overlooked in the midst of my family's turmoil. Sincere friendships and critical dialogue, random outbursts of laughing. They resembled prescription drugs, bringing me back to life. Sitting at my favorite small cafe one spring day, I came to the realization that I no longer felt the desire to return. Put an end to your desire for acceptance. Don't wait for an apology or a hug to make amends. I was at ease with myself now. Even though my family still made an effort to connect with me, on occasion, I didn't feel dragged back into the usual cycle of responsibility and guilt this time. Since I knew I had permanently left that darkness, I was able to grin at their attempts with composure. I made my own life decision, a life that was complete, unrestricted, and brimming with love. First love for myself. My experience serves as a potent reminder that each person has the right to live their own life, not to cast a shadow on others. I at last felt truly free and happy when I had the guts to let go of things that weren't mine. Life was now about establishing my own worth and aspirations, rather than making quiet sacrifices. To discover the light sometimes. Leaving even the most familiar places behind requires courage, and I succeeded. How do you feel about Grace's path? Was it appropriate for her to leave and take back her identity? Leave a comment with your ideas. For more touching and motivational family tales, remember to subscribe to the channel.